Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 4 of the 8-week session of Music 104. When you're done with this week, you will be halfway done with the class. I know that it is moving quickly, but that's probably why you signed up for this session of it. But that means that it goes fast and you've got to keep up on the work. So just a quick heads up, there are roughly now about 30 to 32 students in this class, and I am averaging maybe a third of you that are replying to the videos. These videos serve as reminders of what's coming up, and also to set context for the week's materials to help get you ready for what you're going to need to deal with for the assignments. So it's important that you watch them. I have actually had several students that have reached out to me asking me to go back and unlock assignments. And as I said at the very beginning of the class, and it says in the materials, I don't do that. You need to stay on top of everything. I have a lot of work to do in terms of grading and all of that. So it's important that we're all staying on top. I send out a midweek reminder, and usually on a Wednesday or a Thursday, mostly Thursdays. And I also send a reminder out Sunday mornings. So it's important that you're getting your announcements. If you don't have them set up to go to your phone, maybe you need to do that. You can set all that up. It was in all the introductory materials. But that's part of the class. And so we're, getting you set and prepared for, the sort of big, ugly world that's out there. And so this is part of that. So once a week is shut down, once modules are done, they are done and we are moving on. So this next week, in fact, these next 2 weeks, you're going to have 3 modules to work through instead of 2. You've had 2 mostly, but again, to take 16 weeks down to 8, to take 19 chapters in the orientation material, this is the way that it's got to work. So there's a fair amount of work, so I recommend that you do not wait until the last minute. So like every week, I have the modules open up on Mondays, the assignments open up on Tuesdays, and you have to move sequentially through the modules to get to where you can do that, to take the quizzes, to do that. You can click through it, you can do everything as fast as you can, but the point is that that's how you learn. That's why we're doing all of this. I don't, enjoy being sort of the parent side of this. I want you all to do well. Remember that you're in college to learn, and I'm here to help you do that. And so that's that. That's enough lecturing for me. Again, you know what you have. Your discussion posts are always due. Your initial one are due on Thursday nights. Your replies are due by Sunday. Your quizzes as you finish each module. And that's how that works. That'll be the extent of it for this week. Your test 2 will be after next week. And then don't forget, coming up down the line in a few weeks, you've got your concert report. So you want to be keeping that in mind. And you can do that and turn that in whenever you want. Make sure that you review the rubric. Now, as for the material that's going on upcoming this week, we have 3 big, very, very important chapters that are going on. We've gone from blues and jazz to R&B to rock and roll. We learned about Elvis, who's this huge game changer. We've learned about technological changes. We've learned about, jukeboxes and microphones and the radio and all of that. And everything that we've dealt with so far has been here in the United States, but that's going to change now because we're going to learn about the British invasion. So the British invasion was in 1964, but the Beatles started a few years before that, and it was really because of the Beatles. Now, as I mentioned, there's probably no more important solo artist in the history of rock and roll than Elvis Presley. What the barriers he broke down, the input that he had, the influence that he had musically, socially, all of that was profound. There is no more important band than the Beatles. If you read the materials and you go through the materials, you will understand why, and you will be asked why. And I have had in the past, a student or two that's tried to argue with me, and we've usually, it's good-natured argument, but we've usually taken the time, or I will, to point out, I'm not saying the Beatles have to be your favorite band or your favorite British invasion band. I love the Beatles. They're not my favorite British invasion band, but without a doubt, the influence that they had was hugely significant. In fact, there's this great book on the shelf behind me called How the Beatles Destroyed Rock and Roll. It's not an anti-Beatles book. It's actually about how the Beatles changed music from rock and roll, from teenage music to dance to make out to do whatever to music that was a sophisticated listening experience. By the time you get to the end of the Beatles with Sgt. Pepper's and all of that, the idea was that you would sit down and listen to this music, that it wasn't just music that you would dance to or whatever. So their influence is profound. They changed the game. The only band that I would maybe put that was so diverse and so versatile after that was Queen, but Queen wouldn't be Queen without the Beatles, and even they acknowledge that. Every band acknowledges the weight of the Beatles. So the first chapter that you're going to do just focuses on the Beatles and the Stones. And sometimes you hear this, who's better, the Beatles or the Stones? That's really not a fair argument, because the Beatles and the Stones are very different bands. The Beatles grew up on skiffle, which was kind of a American folk influenced British style, and rock and roll. Elvis, Buddy Holly, Carl Perkins, all of that. The Beatles, the Stones were influenced by the blues and country. And the saying that I say a lot about the Rolling Stones is that the greatest American band that happened to come from England. So they are night and day. Different bands approaching things differently. The Beatles had 4 writers. The Stones had 2. The configuration of the band was different. So it's really not fair to say one was better than the other, because they are both amazing bands. You can certainly say, oh, I like this one more than the other. That's subjective, right? That's not something that you can argue with anybody, although I'm sure people would try. But they can't take away who you would like more. But in terms of significance, the Beatles basically opened the door through the British invasion in 1964 that allowed bands like the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, the Who, the Animals, all these British bands to break through. And had the Beatles not broke through, maybe it wouldn't have happened the way that it did, or at the time that it did. Sort of like that question that I asked you about Elvis. We don't know, right? We can't go back, we can't change it. But they were a very unique combination of a band that worked very hard, that paid their dues. And you have to remember that all of these bands that you're learning about right now, they started off as cover bands. They started off playing in clubs for people dancing, and they learned how to play, they learned how to write, and write their own songs, record their own songs. And so that was really groundbreaking. Up until the Beatles, you for the most part in pop and rock music, it was not common to have the same group, especially with white musicians, to have the same group that the same person that wrote the song record the song, and you didn't typically have bands. The idea with the Beatles that you would have a band that would write their own songs, record their own songs in the studio was groundbreaking. And the other sort of important influence on that is Bob Dylan, who you'll also learn about. So you'll also see that the British invasion shook up things over here in the States so much that the States had to figure out, how do we deal with this? And there were a couple of things that came out of it, including the Monkees and sort of the pop, post-Beatles pop world. And power pop came out of that. And then you have a resurgence of blues. One of the things that happened in England was this revitalization or resurgence of American blues. It often gets termed the British Blues Revival, but that's a kind of a misnomer. It's the British revival of American blues. A lot of blues artists had become, were not popular anymore. A lot of them didn't even know these folks were still around. And England, the English people, there was like almost this cult type following of American blues artists. And when they would travel, they would be like rock stars over in England. And some of the bands, English bands, got to back them up or tour with them. And as a result, it revitalized the blues here in America, where you have people like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and folks like that. So you're going to learn about this British blues revival with John Mayall's Blues Breakers, Fleetwood Mac, which you may not know was actually originally a blues band before they went through some personnel changes and became the pop band of the 70s. And then you're going to learn about Bob Dylan and folk music, and then into folk rock and the singer-songwriters. And when you're talking about game changers, when I used to like sketch this out on a blackboard or whatever, you would have Elvis, and then below that you would have the Beatles, and next to the Beatles would be Bob Dylan. You would have the Beach Boys' influence on the Beatles, which was very significant. But then you would have the Beatles and Bob Dylan, and they're different artists, but very, very influential. Bob Dylan came out of a different tradition as a folk artist and a folk singer, and that had a very different focus. I'm not going to go into all of that lecture because you're going to learn about it and read about it, but you will see how he did that. But the important thing too is that Dylan and the Beatles influenced each other directly. Bob Dylan actually took the Beatles to task and said, look, why don't you actually write songs that mean something, that have depth, that aren't just love songs? And this is in '64. And the Beatles challenged Dylan to use electric instruments, to think more about melody, and so they definitely had a profound influence. So you're going to go through the learning about folk with Bob Dylan, and there's probably three bigger artists in terms of changing the course and the game of rock history than Elvis, than the Beatles and Bob Dylan. And then you have other important folks along the way like Jimi Hendrix. You'll go through this, but they were revolutionary. Bob Dylan went electric in '65 and introduced folk rock with the Byrds covering Dylan's Tambourine Man, and that opened up a whole nother thing, and then the singer-songwriters after that. So you're going to have those three modules. So get to work early on this so that you don't run yourself out of time. I've graded some assignments where I can tell that folks are coming in at the very last minute and then they're just not doing the work. Make sure that you're following the instructions on those reflection observations. I want those, I want the topic copy and pasted at the top. I do that so that you will have one more chance to look at it and say, hey, does this really answer what is being asked? Because I'm getting some turned in that don't do that. Okay, so I think that's it. You have the three modules, the two assignments, your discussion, reflection, observation, your three quizzes. So be on top of it, be timely, reach out if you need to. And just to let me know, because it's really important that you watch these. I want to know how many of you are watching this. I can go to YouTube and look up the views, but that's not necessarily completely accurate. So here's what I just want you to do. Just reply to this video with, got it, understood, I watched it, something like that. And we'll go from there. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.